This is Ali Vogel from Flexi Design, and today I have the privilege of interviewing a good friend of mine, Omer Goldberg, the CEO of Chaos Labs. Thank you so much for being on with us today, Omer.
Yeah, it's an honor. Thanks for keeping me in mind.
Awesome. So Omer is working on some really, really interesting AI-centric products. And so I thought it would be a natural fit to have him on today. Normally, we have design leaders on Flexible by Design, but Omer is really unique in the way that he views design as part of his product development process as a founder. So Omer, I would love if you could kick us off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you're up to these days and what you're building.
So Chaos Labs today is the industry-leading risk platform for financial applications on blockchains. So it's a mouthful. I'll that down. What that means is that we've built an AI risk engine that under the hood powers the biggest exchanges, lending markets, stablecoins, derivative instruments in real time. Over the past years, we've priced and powered, it's nearing 3 trillion in volume globally. So that's kind of what the product does. So it's a very kind of technical product where there's a lot of AI and ML at its core. At the same time, the update and the data that we stream has direct top line effects on business and revenue goals. So it's incredibly important for leaders at these companies to understand why we're doing what we're doing and have some element of explainability towards it. So alongside the models, we also ship a pretty expensive kind of analytics AI platform where they can understand what's happening and why. And there's analytics part of it. There's also now a conversational interface. And so that's like the product in a nutshell. Previous to Chaos, I was at Instagram and Facebook as an engineer and tech lead for a few years and startups before that. But that's the intro.
And Omer, you're forgetting your most important job ever.
I
How did we
skipped that.
meet?
No, we met, I think, how many years ago was it?
8 years
8
ago.
years, almost a decade ago. I was studying computer science at the Israel Institute of Technology and had a student job. And that student job was teaching application development at Israel Tech Challenge at ITC. And I had one amazing student who really stood out, which was Ali. And that's where the friendship started almost a decade ago.
Yeah, I just remember everyone would always run to Omer because he was the man with the answers. And, he stood out among the rest in terms of the tutors there. So it's so cool, Omer, to see how you've gone from being a student, from, teaching code to all kinds of backgrounds to now actually leading this very successful company. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the company has evolved throughout the years and, what you've done in terms of fundraising, but more importantly, in terms of customer success and who some of your clients are, if you can talk about it and what some of the progress you've made, if you can talk about it. But I want to start us out by asking you, when did AI become part of your vocabulary?
I think it's definitely over a decade. So when I studied at the Technion at the Israel Institute of Technology, I majored in computer science, but my I guess minor was information systems, and at the Technion, that's basically statistics, machine learning, and what was considered AI at the time. I think that was like also the first wave where big data. Like I don't know if people who are watching this like even remember that, but there was like a good few years where there was like a big data craze in machine learning. And basically everybody thought that you'd be able to do very quickly what we're seeing today with large language models, but it wasn't really there. So there were a few kind of like narrow use cases where there were advances in different machine learning and AI techniques, but kind of it was written off as like the first hype wave of AI and ML. And it came back in a big way, I think, at least in the public perception when GPT-3 released like 2.5 years ago. So it was really like AI ML, it's an umbrella term for many different types of techniques for processing data and extracting insights. I think now it's ubiquitous with large language models. That's what everybody's excited about. But prior to that, there were a few other waves that were very promising, but didn't quite have the impact and the market penetration that we're seeing with language models. I think another thing that I'll just say that's interesting is I think 2017 chatbots was huge. So you
I
had like companies
remember. I
raising.
totally remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't really manifest in the way that it is now. So there have been a few waves and like boom and bust cycles of AI.
Yeah, I remember back in probably 2017, 2018, I was working at a company called WalkMe, And WalkMe is a company that has coined the term DAP, Digital Adoption Platform, essentially helping users to adopt to different software. WalkMe has since gone public and then gotten acquired by SAP. And I went representing WalkMe to a chatbot conference. That's how popular it was. There was actually a whole conference just around chatbots. So that was big back then. And like you said, I mean, part of the creation of a chatbot was using AI to understand and to contextualize and to actually give smart responses. So even though AI has become massively adopted in the last 2, 3 years, it really started far before then. And that actually leads me to wanting to ask you about the inception of Chaos Labs. So you started Chaos Labs around 4-ish years ago. Tell me a little bit about what you were utilizing from an AI perspective and what the perception was around what you were building back before the whole LLM craze and adoption.
Yeah, so we went through a lot of pivots. I think the initial idea for Chaos Labs was very much, or was directly influenced from my time on Instagram and Facebook. And I think most people think of it as a great social app and a way to talk to your friends, but there's actually a very rigorous data culture at Facebook. And really, to ship anything meaningful, you need to A/B test it. Right. It's one of the most lucrative, heavily monetized. I'm speaking now specifically at my time at Instagram working on feed and stories, but one of the most heavily like monetized surfaces. It accounts for a top line revenue. And any tiny change that you might make there could introduce massive losses or kind of gains for the business. So once you build your feature and you see that it works, you set up a bunch of data collectors within the app, you run it to what's considered a small experiment group at Facebook, which might be like a few 100 million users
Just a
across
few.
like different demographics, just a tiny sliver of the population. And then after some period in which you deem the results that you're seeing statistically significant, every engineer actually needs to go in front of a data council, like a council of data scientists, and actually like argue, why their feature should be shipped. And it's almost never straightforward because it's a super complex app. There's almost nothing that makes everything go up and to the right. So there are just trade-offs, and you need to be able to understand and reason about the data. All of this is to say is that Facebook has really kind of made an art out of shipping applications in a data-driven way. Parallel to my time at Facebook, I was always interested in distributed systems and crypto. And when on-chain finance started to grow in 2019, 2020, I took notice, and there were billions of dollars of capital flowing into these ecosystems and hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions in volume. But it was super primitive, the way that these applications were being managed. And for me, it was like fairly obvious that it should be optimized in ways similar to what I had observed at Instagram. It was that idea. I was like, well, this is an emerging, budding industry. There's so much low-hanging fruit here. Let's create this platform. And I tried to literally recreate what I did at Instagram, those tools, shamelessly. And it sounded good. Everybody wanted to make data-driven decisions, but ultimately it was pretty complex for a lot of people, which I hadn't realized at the time, because kind of that Venn diagram between teams and mostly startups who I was selling to that have expertise in statistics, probability, engineering. In our case, like blockchain engineering and all of these things is pretty small. So some of the early feedback that we got was, we really want output of this, which is a better way to make decisions and in real time. But we need something more prescriptive because we don't have like the resources to spin up a team that can do this. So we listened and kind of built a suite of different products that we offer today. And that was really the story. That was kind of the journey we went through. So we went through developer platform to like a risk platform where the distance and the effort to get the insights that the users wanted to is much smaller. We were no longer expecting their developers to do all of the heavy lifting.
And tell me about the name Chaos Labs. Where does that come from?
So Chaos Labs actually comes from chaos engineering, which I think Netflix kind of brought back into the conversation also about a decade ago. This is like the first podcast I really feel like I'm showing my age. And I'm feeling old because everything is from like a decade ago, a decade plus. But yeah, like when microservices or cloud-based microservices started becoming really popular, it was great. It had a lot of benefits. One of the downsides of it was really complex to manage like all of these systems in real time. And you could no longer do very explicit deterministic testing across like the whole platform. So chaos engineering is like this method where this system is too complex to cover explicitly. Let me just actually think of like what are the worst outages or failures the system could have. If it could still be resilient like under those conditions, then I'm pretty good. I'm in a pretty good state and I'm pretty robust. And when I thought of, what I was doing and what I was securing and what we were optimizing for in the on-chain finance world, it's the same. There's like high degree of composability. Everything is open source. You don't control all the pieces that your code is interfacing with. And we were trying to build an environment for chaos engineering. So that's where the name Chaos Labs came from.
And I know, Omer, as you've been building this product, you've been very, very involved in not just the engineering side, but also on the design side and the aesthetics and the look and the feel and the user experience. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy towards designing great products. Do you follow a specific framework? We would love to hear a little how you became such an involved founder in that way.
So this company was bootstrapped for the first like year plus, scaled it over to a few $1 million in revenue, and it was just me. And at that time, I was doing everything. So it was like from design to engineering to sales to customer support. Today, I have more help for like around 60 people. I felt like being close to the product and running all the functions and understanding what was happening was very much part of that success. And yeah, I wanted to continue that. I think since then, what I've realized is that I just want to focus more on the areas where I think that I bring extra value. So, for example, it's not in finance, it's not in ops, it's not in payroll. However, on the product side and the engineering side, kind of I enjoy it, and I feel like that's where I brought kind of the most impact to the company. So that's where I try to spend most of my time these days. And that's ideating from what the product looks like to how it works on the back end and everything in between. In terms of framework, I wish that I was more organized and methodical. I'm not. I kind of like know what I like and just try to kind of get inspired by companies and design systems that I think kind of look clean and do a good job of conveying the information and guiding the users along the journey they need to be in. So kind of I'm very opinionated in that front, but I'm also lucky to work with kind of great designers and product folks on the team that can take my ambiguous thoughts and flesh it out into something that's more precise.
So how would you describe your design language today?
Yeah, so I mean, we work in Figma. We have a UI design library and component and branding and fonts, color schemes, all of those things, which served us very well for the first few years of the company, where it was mostly kind of your run-of-the-mill analytics products.
And was that something that you custom made from the beginning, or were you using external libraries? Tell me a little bit more about that.
I started with material design. Again, it was just me. And I always thought that, yeah, like I'll get to it. And just like tech debt, there is the design debt. And it became something that was way harder to pull out later. We did it. So I think about a year and a half ago, we did a rebrand. And did something that was thoughtful. We redid the logo and came up with our own design system. And it took a few months, but ultimately it's something that I think is one of the most important things that you can do after you find, arguably even before, like product market fit. But it's definitely important to kind of have your unique voice and identity.
Absolutely. And so for those who haven't yet gone and checked out Chaos Labs, they have a beautiful visual design language. And if you look at the site, there's really sleek interactions, animations. As someone who prides themselves on doing a lot of these things for our clients, I took a look at Chaos Labs when Omer showed me the site, and I told him it looks great and there's a lot of really interesting and thoughtful choices that were made. So what can we expect in terms of the evolution of the product, of specifically how you're thinking about design with the product, and even more specifically, how you see this potentially being impacted with everything that is being output with AI today?
So I think that in many ways, there was a big surface to cover with the early product, but there were many examples of what it looked like. And now Chaos is the new AI product. You could think of it like Perplexity or OpenAI's Deep Researcher, but very, very focused on the financial domain with real-time data, data visualizations, expert analysis of said data. And this is actually kind of like net new. I mean, generally like AI generative AI first products have come to market over the past like 12 to 18 months. And I think what most people are used to is like a chat interface, which obviously is valuable. But the way that I think about it is that, I think within 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we'll kind of look back and say, like, remember we had to type everything, and remember it was just text, and so on and so forth. So still very early. And I think we're going to see new design paradigms emerge. And that's part of, I mean, a lot of the work that we've been doing is product leading up to this launch.
That's a really interesting point you make because similar to the way that we look at the way that we as humans interacted with technology, even in the chatbot era, as we referenced, we are going to look back on the way that we interface with AI today in a whole different paradigm. And it sounds like you are really thinking about those interactions very much top of mind. So if you had to guess, what would you say are some of the interaction patterns that you expect in the next 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years that we'll be adopting?
Yeah, so I think so. One of them is generative UI, and we're already implementing that in this version. Obviously, it's something we're going to continue to invest in, but I'll explain like what I mean. Generally, like programming is until today has been very deterministic, right? So you write like a piece of code that if you execute it 1,000 times, putting edge cases on the side, it's going to do the same thing, or at least it should if it's good code, right? But enter LLMs, and by definition, they're probabilistic, right? So these are probabilistic models. At the end of the day, they predict the next token or the next word or group of words that kind of really well. But you could ask the same query to the same model consecutively and get different responses, right? So that's like number one. It's this kind of like new way to think about like what the computer, the input might be the same, the output is going to be different. And if you give the same query, obviously to different models, you can also get different things. So that's one big paradigm shift. Now, the other thing is because most of these applications are kind of query based today, you don't really have that much control over what the user is going to ask you, which actually has another interesting downstream effect. Typically, when you go into a website or an app, they might have a few screens. We even talk about it as screens. And in that screen, there's like a predetermined flow that you can take. And there isn't really too much left to write here. But now the user can ask whatever they want, and it's your job to generate a response which is as relevant to their query as possible. So one way to go about this is let me try and meditate or understand like what the distribution of queries are that I'm going to get, and I'll try to make a screen or experience for each one of them. Literally, it's infinite amount of options, so you can't really cover that well. So what we try to do is once we can extract the intent for the user, we have a separate process to the data fetching that actually determines what is the layout of the UI that we should be showing, right? And this is, I think, like pretty new because that means that ideally, or what we want to be able to handle at the end of the day is that we can generate kind of the right report, the right hierarchy of information, data, and visualizations in context at runtime given your query. So that's generative, I think, UI, making the UI dynamic based on the input of the user.
And this is something that now that we're dating ourselves and we're moving backwards, I remember talking about this when we were at ITC. This was a hot topic, right? And we never really quite figured out how to do it. I remember in the same vein for a hackathon, someone proposed text to image based storytelling, and we could kind of have some semblance of some abstract piece. And 8 years later, it's here. I mean, it's been here actually for the last 3 years in a really significant way. And now we're actually seeing this generative AI that has some element, like you said, of maybe personalization or other inputs that are a big part of that are starting to show up in enterprise products, because that's essentially what you're building, right? I mean, your customers are large enterprises for the most part that will really be able to utilize this to get all sorts of intelligence. But the really interesting part is that you are taking this element of personalization and you're applying it to UI in a very generative way, which I think that everyone here will be really interested in understanding how you're actually creating that, right? Is it something you're building in-house? Is it something that you're leveraging an external API to pull? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'll say first that like the initial products that we built over the first few years were enterprise. KSI is going to be open. And like one of the mission statements that we have is democratizing access to financial intelligence. So like the quick one-liner here is today, only if you're very wealthy do you have access to a high quality financial advisor. But in the age of AI, everybody should be able to get that same kind of counsel, advice and support for, pennies. So that's like number one. And I think that's also a really interesting thing, maybe like in a lot of veins similar to the iPhone with AI, that if the product is really good, like a billionaire and a college student are going to have access to the same interface. So today, you probably have in your pocket the same iPhone that Elon Musk has, right? And in the same way, we're all using the same chat terminal, right? Whether you're Sam Altman or you're a student in NYU. So if we build the product right, yes, it has the ability to go extremely deep in terms of like being highly specialized, but it should also understand who it's talking to and be able to calibrate the level of the response and thereby the relevancy based on the user. So that's number one. This will be open to everybody. Number two, in terms of how we're thinking about it, so there's no APIs as far as I know that do generative UI. In fact, I would say that like with all of the hype that AI has generated, besides the chat terminals and ChatGPT, the application itself, and maybe Perplexity, there aren't many standalone AI first or AI central applications that have taken off. So what we've seen is a lot of like enterprises integrating AI. So the features are more streamlined, it's a little bit faster, the app understands what you want, but not many new applications yet that are experiences that are enabled because of AI. And the caveat here is besides kind of like I guess like workspace utility tools like Granola, which will create a transcript of your conversation, or Cursor, which is like if you're coding, like new experiences. So that's like the caveat. So maybe that's why these generative AI frameworks don't yet exist. We've built our own. And this is interesting and kind of high level. The way that it works is we have basically this flow that a user will write a query, will run some type of intent extraction to understand what data we need to fetch or what response we need to generate to address the question of the user in the most relevant way. And that will dictate what the shape or the hierarchy of the UI should look like. Here, right now, the AI gets to select from a component of UI libraries. So when it's kind of making the proposal for structuring the UI, it says, okay, this is my world. That's today. There's a future where the AI can just construct the React component or whatever it is, or the image or the chart on the fly. Already seeing stuff like that in production, but that's how we're doing it today.
And it's so interesting that you're focusing on that because that's actually not your core business. Your core business is giving financial intelligence, and yet you see some great value in providing this generative AI that has this element of personalization. So, from a strategic perspective, why did you decide to invest so much in that user experience?
I think that like UX is one of the underrated things in AI products. Because I think the way that the model conveys information, the language that it uses, the experience of waiting for the information to load, and what that feels like, just really, really influences heavily the perception of the user, whether it's the quality of the application that they're speaking to, or even the intelligence of the AI. I think we're working closely with a few folks at OpenAI, and like one of the things that they were kind of telling us was massive variance or difference in user satisfaction based on small tweaks in report structure and hierarchy. So it could literally be the same information, just presented differently, maybe worded differently, and the difference in how it's perceived by the user and whether it's enjoyable or not is actually immense. So yeah, I mean, I just think it's core to the product, and that justifies an investment.
And it's so interesting that you say that because it's been one of the core trends that we've seen. As you know, we work across a lot of different industries. And when I started working on Flexi, we were seeing a lot of product development in a lot of different areas, and this buzz around integrating AI started to become part of the conversation, but it was more about the feature itself as opposed to the core value that it would bring to the user. And one of the big shifts that I've seen even in the last 6 months has been the majority of our clients, whether it be in healthcare or whether it be in data or productivity tools or in fintech, are becoming very aware that it's not just about integrating a small AI feature here or there, but it's making AI enabled features part of the core value proposition. Like you can't even build a product anymore, one that appeals to a user in a significant way. And I'm talking about digital products, of course, without thinking about, how can AI actually serve our users towards achieving their goals. So it's not even an option anymore, but it's becoming a necessity because all of the things that we've been talking about for all of these years around personalization, streamlining processes, around just making the users not have to think so hard about how to actually achieve their goal is becoming a reality with all of the tools that we have in hand. So, on that note, I'm curious to hear from you. What are some of the AI tools or APIs that you are currently curious about?
Yeah, so I mean, they're the obvious ones, which I'll just like note, but skip that have been great for us, which are all of the foundational models, so like O3 from ChatGPT, Anthropic, Gemini, recently have been great on the technical side. Even on the BD side, whether it's like quickly like doing a market research for us. Like this week, I had two sessions with deep research where I was consulting with it on a go-to market strategy and wanted examples. And incredible, would have taken so long to do that even a year ago. Obviously, kind of cursor, windsurf on the coding side, but the one that I'm recently playing with that I think it's safe to say that I've adopted it into the my workflow is Vercel v0, which is basically
Mm.
like Lovable or some of these other um, like React app or I guess JavaScript web app developers. There's v0, there's Lovable. I think there's another one. Ali, do you remember? Have you
Yeah.
heard of them?
E0, Lovable, and Base 44. Is that the
I
name?
think yeah, Base 44 is the Israeli one, I think, right?
Okay.
I
I'm not sure
think.
where it's from. Yeah, but it's another one that's been comparable.
Yeah, same idea there. And the way that I'm using it now is that I'm actually prototyping every new like product experience and screen before I hand it over to design or even engineers.
Mm.
So I will literally write a spec for what the feature looks like. I'll also paste screenshots from my Figma. In some cases, I think Lovable even lets you give a link to your Figma if you have like a design system, and it'll just build out the screen. And it forces me to think now that I actually have like a working application in front of me and the cost of iterating on that application is so low, I just do the whole flow basically. And then I give it to the design team to either give me a second opinion or polish and make smoother and add animations. But it has significantly reduced the time to prototype like new
Mhm.
features.
And it's almost as if it's replaced the PRDs. For those of you
Yep.
that are listening that don't know, the term PRD is a product document requirement, where back in the old days of 6 months ago, people would basically write these documents and pass it off to their product teams. But now, like Omer is talking about, if you're a founder, if you're a product manager, if you are a marketing professional that wants to communicate your ideas to design and engineering, you really do have the ability with vibe coding, with Base 44, with V0, with Lovable to present a prototype. We actually have an example of this that literally happened on Monday, where we have a client we've been working with for a long time, and we work with their product team, we work with their marketing team, we did their whole website, and they're launching an enterprise platform as part of their core solution. And the marketing team actually came to us with a lovable prototype, and they were like, hey guys, so we built this. We know it's not very good, but this conveys the general idea of what we want you to polish off and what we want you to build. And for us, that was awesome because we're like, great, so let's get to work. And it really does enable so much streamlining of that communication, of that guesswork, reading through a Notion doc or a Google Doc. I mean, who wants to do that anymore when you can just literally prompt your way to showcasing your ideas? So I love that. I love that you've been adopting that. How long have you been doing that for?
So I've been adopting, I started doing it a month ago and basically realized there was no going back. I think that like very quickly I realized that this is how I'm going to work now because it has just a ton of benefits and it really changes like how you think about like product development. My flow right now is I have like a working doc where it's a few hundred words about what the product looks like and screenshot images. Every time I want to create a new feature or flow, I'll feed that as like preamble into the prompt in O3, and then just click on the mic and explain what the feature is. It'll transcribe it, and then I tell O3 to give me um, basically a PRD that I'm going to fit into V0. So O3 is creating the prompt and all of the context for V0. Then I put it into V0 and V0 generates the flow and I start iterating like that. And it's just like ping ponging like through all of the applications.
So let me ask you this controversial question for all the designers out there. If this is your workflow, why even use design?
So I think I could say why today. Like in the future, I don't know if these responses are going to be valid. So we'll see. But that initial effort of creating your brand kit, your brand style, your logo, those things still, if you're doing it well and with a team that has some type of like artistic taste and vision, I don't think the models are there yet. So good designers, good people who understand branding, visual and verbal identity are still better with models. So anything that kind of requires discretion and taste, it's improving really quickly, but I would say it's still better. Once you have that and you can feed it into Lovable or any of these like kind of applications that work with it, it might be enough for many of your features. So like if you're spinning up like a new like landing page or some type of form or adding like a widget and a table, that might be enough. So then there's like the question, are like we all out of work? I mean, designers, this could also be argued for engineers. I think today over 50% of the code in our company is generated by AI. So I think it's like a valid question for any kind of profession. So there's one argument that says that we'll be unemployed. There's another argument, which I see at our company, which it just lets us move faster and lets us focus on the hard problems, the highly strategic problems from the design perspective, like the core kind of loops and flows that machines can't do yet. So I'm viewing it today as something that will automate all of the like drudgery and like repetitive work on the engineering side, on the coding side, maybe even on the BD side in creating kind of like templates and proposals that are like marginally different than something you've done for another client. We'll see where these models continue progressing towards. But I think it's hard to be not a senior, it's hard to be a junior today.
And I think that's exactly correct. And this is something that I've seen a lot in the industry where you had mentioned to me, or a lot of clients generally that we work with multiple partners, right? So they'll work with their more high-end strategic partner, and then they'll also work with, people for different reasons that are more production level or kind of just get it done quickly, cheaply, whatever, right? And so this is where I see the work kind of disappearing or at least evolving. You can't just be mediocre anymore because maybe a lot of these AI systems can be better in mediocrity than you can, right? So for that kind of work, I mean, we're already seeing that completely starting to dry up. But where there's a lot of room for growth is in the more strategic type of visioning work. So you had talked about the team that you work with today, and they created this awesome brand for you to the point that, when you and I were talking about your product, one of the first things I said to you was, wow, I love your brand, Omer. Omer, like this is really cool. This is great. And the thinking behind it, it's really smart the way that things are laid out, even the way the motion is in terms of looking at the subtleties of a lot of the visual communication and what your brand is achieving. And this is something that, yes, a AI mechanism can definitely help in terms of the inspirational aspects of that. But ultimately, there is a level of craft that is very much still needed from the human perspective. So this is pushing us to be better, more creative, more productive, and ultimately, as you had mentioned, focusing on the problems that actually matter and focusing on the core and allowing the rest to be built or the gaps to be filled in by different AI agents or systems, which is actually really exciting, especially if this is what you enjoy focusing on. So in that note, I want to ask you about how you're thinking because you're using AI so much in your workflow, which has been really interesting for us to hear about. But what are some of the risks and what are some of the guardrails that you are putting in place in order to keep your users safe?
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion. So we're doing, I can't say the partner, but we're working with like, hopefully soon I'll be able to say like one of the leaders in AI safety. So the first thing that I think of when I think of guardrails is like the output of the application. So today, just like generally like quick recap, AI safety, these models are trained on, or at least the ones that we're most familiar with, the basically all of the public internet and, you know, many books and literature, everything they have licensed to kind of feed to the model. Also things that they don't have license to feed to the model, different story. And it's extremely knowledgeable. The issue with safety is that the model has the requisite knowledge in many cases. For example, to teach somebody how to create a bomb or a weapon, right? And that is just in like, I don't know, homeland security or like national security perspective, how to create malware, how to compromise passwords, how to, you know, DOS an energy center, so their traffic, right? So these are dangerous things. The foundational models spend millions and millions of dollars in trying to prevent this with a lot of different methods, like red teaming, so literal humans that will come and try to kind of trick the model into giving it information that is dangerous. The real way to do this is to have some type of like post response generation, like processing where you kind of like make sure that you're not saying things that you shouldn't be saying or that could be harmful in any way. This is also very difficult. And I'll just come back. The reason it's difficult is because all of this is based on like neural networks and transformers and machine learning generally. It's very black box. So this type of machine learning generally is, at the end of the day, the whole model is represented by a bunch of different weights. So it's hard to derive why the model is responding how it's responding in certain areas. And this field of study is called mechanistic interpretability. Anthropic are investing a lot here. It's something they speak about. Dario, the CEO, speaks about publicly at length. So today it's a kind of really rudimentary. It's like check the response, make sure that, and then maybe use an LLM to say like, is the response referring or is the question referring to anything that's on this like blacklist of like topics that I don't want to talk about? There's general work that's done by the foundational models to like not instruct people how to build bombs or commit crimes. From our perspective, we are a financial AI, so we want to be careful for not giving financial advice, not, you know, speaking poorly on competitors, for example, not saying things that we
That
don't
could
have.
be an easy one. Could
Yeah,
that could be an
maybe that
easy
one
one
will
to
let
slip in
go.
there.
Yeah, so that one maybe we'll spend less time working on. But no, the other things are also just like these models really want to be helpful. So a lot of times they don't have the response. So, you know, what's called an hallucination, generate something that
Yeah.
sounds plausible,
Yeah.
but it's just completely made up. So there's a bunch of different techniques here. We spend a lot of time here because the last thing I'll say on this topic is we spoke about it. We have over 1 million users signed up for the application, and I've built products and companies before, and typically, you know, like as a founder or when you're rolling out like any new product, you need to.
Wait, you have 1 million users signed up for the application you haven't even released yet.
Yeah, there's a wait list. Yeah, there's a wait
Wow.
list. There's some people who are on it yet, but there's like I think as of this morning, 1.2 million users who are waitlisted.
Insane.
But this comes to prove the point that like we're in this moment right now where everybody has genuine excitement and there's the pull to try new AI products. The flip side of that is that people lose trust in these products very quickly. So if you come onto the AI platform the first time and it's not answering correctly, making up answers, hallucinating, most people are just like I'm not. This isn't worth my time. I'll stick to ChatGPT. So that is like the other thing which I kind of put into like safety and guardrails is that it's not only about like doing diabolical malicious things, but also like if you're not sure and you don't have high confidence in the response that you're generating, you tell the user or you know you behave in some other way because it's very easy to break trust and it's very hard to regain it.
Yes, absolutely. On that point, at Config this week, one of the speakers spoke about how trust is the highest valued currency in products today. And this was someone who worked at Instagram, at Coinbase. Of course, trust is huge there. It needs to be, and now works at World Labs. And the point that you made around the guardrails, especially with things like hallucinations, which might not have malintent to it, but yet if you give users a false sense of trust and you break that trust, then it's gone virtually forever, right? So there's elements that you really want to focus on as a design partner with your team, product, engineering, the founding strategic team, et cetera, that when you're designing these core AI products, such as you're describing, you need to think about these elements. And I'm curious to hear from you, just as our last point today, if you have any rituals with your design team, with your product team that you have in place, such as questions or frameworks or anything to the tune of how do we make sure that we're designing the product, both from a visual but also from an architectural standpoint, that is not going to fall into some of these AI pitfalls?
So like I'll start just by saying that one of the unique characteristics of this technology is how well it demos. So you can like just have a good prompt, and if you're really quickly do like a POC where it seems like the AI like really understands your use case and that it's ready, and then you try and take that thing to production and realize very quickly that things fall apart. Right. So the way that most people do that today is that it's like it's a vibe check. It's effectively like, oh,
Yeah, it's a vibe check, right? What
yeah,
else?
it's a vibe check, and that's not how we do it. So what we spend time doing is creating what's called like an eval set, right?
Mm.
So these are a list of, questions where we have experts, domain experts. Our expertise is in finance, so we have them obviously within the company that annotate and label this data set. And we will always like run these end-to-end tests where we input the queries, see what the model generates, and then test the output to see whether or not we're improving or regressing accuracy. So we use that as a baseline. And we have like several hundred, actually thousand of questions that we test on, and we're pretty extensive there. It's work. Like doing this, it's not necessarily like sexy work, but that is how you check whether or not the product is doing what you want it to do. And the quality of your product is going to be downstream of that. So once you graduate from I'm doing like a demo, I'm doing a POC, and you want to take something to production, especially in an enterprise setting where there might be a lot of value lost if you're hallucinating. This is kind of how you work. So yeah, from a visual setting, it's just like there's like this meme like right now, or at least one that I saw this week, like, how do you build a good AI product? And then it just crosses out the AI. It's like, how do you build a good product? So all of the same kind of methods that you use to rolling out like a good product, like testing, doing a stage rollout, testing with users, iterating on user feedback. It's the same thing or that we're doing there. I think the main difference there is evals.
Yeah. And to your point, we just had an internal conversation this morning and, made the decision that before we were going to release Flexi AI as a part of Flexi, and we just decided it's actually irrelevant because, first of all, so many of the products we're building are very much AI centric or use AI as the core value proposition anyway across industries. And second of all, the way that you are designing AI products, of course, there's some domain specialization you kind of need to understand, especially when you're dealing with these black boxes of uncertainty. But ultimately, you do need to merge the way that you think about traditional product development, hence crossing out the AI and just saying, how do you build great products, right? A lot of the same principles apply. Of course, part of the knowledge comes from exploring. And that's why I asked you about what are you curious about today? What are you exploring today? Because it is about a lot of hands-on work, understanding what's out there, what's working, what's not working, learning from it, and then applying it to the way that you're doing product development. So, Omer, it's super cool to see how you've been evolving with Chaos Labs, or hence how it's been evolving with you. If you have one message to share with the listeners today about the future of where AI is going, what would that message be?
So I would say, I think we're like, it's like a gold. If you're a builder, a founder, or anyone who's always wanted to do that, I don't think there's ever been a better time to do that. The cost of creation is rapidly approaching zero. So yeah, you can kind of build whatever you want today. There are less and less excuses. And the space is, it's this revolution of AI and the tools is moving faster than anything I've ever seen. And I think it's important to spend time in learning the tooling because there's actually a massive kind of delta and maybe this will get better over time, but in people who know like how to prompt and use the tool and people who don't, it's like almost like if you're holding it the wrong way, you're going to get 5% of what it can do. And if you're the kind of directing it, you can get 100. That's a skill. And that's a skill worth investing in. And the earlier that you do it, further you're going to be, with your competitors or whatever it is you're trying to build. At the same time, it's a tool. So keep the main thing, build, make sure that you're shipping, and yeah, but
Amazing.
basically.
And Do you have any controversial opinions about AI that you want to share with us?
I think that like whatever you're doing, I think you need to think about whether a machine or AI can do it better than you can and be honest with yourself and probably focus on building experiences, products, skills that are going to be relevant. People might think that it's like a Black Mirror doom or take. I think that it's reasonable to think that because we haven't seen something that's moved this quickly. So yeah, just be very intentional and high conviction about what you're building, why you're building, and why it matters.
Awesome. Omer, thank you so much. If people
Thank
want to get
you.
in touch with you, how would they do so?
I'm on Twitter, so Omer A. Goldberg is the handle, and chaoslabs.xyz is the website.
Amazing. So, everyone, I'm going to link the form to sign up for this new amazing tool that people are building. There's already 1.2 million people on the list. So, it will be interesting to see how that rolls out and who gets access and when this is going to drop. I'm so excited to be able to test out the product. And once again, Omer, thank you so, so much for taking the time and for sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.